Everybody know what SWOT is, SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Very typically, when you work with consultants, they'll come to you and say, well, the first thing we need to do is a SWOT analysis. Let's examine the organization, look for our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I say, don't do it at the start, do it after you've set your goals. And look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in terms of the goals that you've set. I mean, the moral equivalent is of saying, gee, I'd like to take a trip, let's do a SWOT analysis. We don't know where we're going, and we're going to examine all the detours and potholes in a 6-state area, where if we know we're going from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, we can narrow the SWOT down to where it has real meaning, because much of what you get out of doing just a general SWOT analysis up front before you set goals is very mushy. How often I have sat down with a group of people and to start planning, and somebody at the table says, what we need is a van, right off the bat. We haven't even decided where we want to go, and we get into the discussion and doing the planning around it, and very typically what we find is a van isn't practical, that it's much more relevant and practical to open up a storefront somewhere else across town to reach those people that we would have been bringing in by a van. Once we've set goals, we need to pay attention to what are the barriers and opportunities related to reaching those goals. In other words, what's going to get in the way, and what are we going to do to address those barriers, and what kind of opportunities can we take advantage of and leverage it. Prescribing the treatment before examining the patient, again, goes back to that earlier point of sitting down and not really understanding where we want to go and deciding what the solutions are going to be. You'll see when we get into the example of the plan that we break things down. We start with a vision, which is that big goal for the organization. Then we break that into 5-year targets, several targets. Then we break it down again into 1-year targets, and then eventually we break it down into what we call action steps or objectives, and get it down to bite-sized pieces. Planning is logical. It's very logical. Think about when you decided to go on vacation and you were planning your vacation. Think when you were planning a wedding. Think about anything in your life you planned, and you'll find that you go through, intuitively, you go through a very logical process. And pay attention to what's important, and don't pay attention to a lot of attention to what's not important. The fact that you need a color printer for your organization is not something that belongs in your strategic plan. It's not that important. You can go out and buy a color printer for $65 these days. The stuff that's important and the things that will move your organization ahead are the things you want to put in your plan. You got to measure the correct things. I don't care that you serve 600 people as a funder. I care about how you're changing the lives of 600 people. And that's really what it's all about. It's all about the impact that you're making, and how do you measure those things. We do work, for example, with a group up in New York City whose job it is to keep kids from dropping out of school. Well, how do you measure something that doesn't happen? Well, in their case, what we figured out was there's a 55% dropout rate between the 9th grade and the 12th grade in the school system from which they're drawing their kids in New York. They have 700 kids in their program, and over a 4-year period, the dropout rate among those 700 kids is about 2%. So we can begin to tell a story here. If 50% of the kids are dropping out of the school system, and of the 700 kids we have in our program, we're losing 1%. The budget for that organization is $700,000 a year. It costs $1 million in lost wages and taxes, incarceration fees, welfare, yada, 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 for a kid that drops out of school in New York over their lifetime. You can really begin to calculate the net value of what you're doing. So there isn't anything, I'm telling you, as somebody that works with a lot of organizations, there isn't anything that can't be measured if you sit down and really start to put your mind to it. And this is probably a good point for me to give you my name, address, or my name, phone number, and contact information. You might want to write it down. It's Bill Bennington. My telephone number is area code 856-235-2952. Email address wjbpjb, P as in Pam, JB, at comcast.net. You can feel free to call me at any time with any kind of a question. I do not charge for those kinds of things, and I would be delighted to help you, and I probably have some tools that will be beneficial to you. And Jim made this point earlier. You got to use your plan. Make it the first item of business on your agenda at every board meeting. Where do we stand against the plan? And you don't need to go through the whole plan. All you need to worry about is where you're off plan. Where are we behind deadline? Where are we behind goal? And those are the only things you need to talk about. So let's walk again through the elements of a plan. As Jim said, your vision is your ultimate destination. That's your dream statement. That's where you want to be at some point out in the future. John F. Kennedy, 1961, made the statement about putting a man on the moon. That was a vision statement, and that was a statement that brought the whole country together. But let's assume for a moment, well, here, first of all, what's the vision relating to evangelizing? What if King Arthur had said, gentlemen, I have a vision. I want to put a man on the moon. Do you think the local funders would have stepped up to the plate at that point to provide some grants to him to help make that machine to get a man on the moon? I don't think so. So as you do your vision, you have to keep it within the realm of reality. One of my favorite vision statements is Federal Express. 100% customer satisfaction. And they consistently run at 98, 99.7%. I was in a FedEx facility once that was about the size of this whole campus. And it was just row after row after row of packages moving down conveyor belts. Like if you could picture all of these tables as conveyor belts for maybe 200 yards long. And I was standing up at the end of one of these with the guy that was the head person in that operation. And way down, about 2/3 of the way down, a package fell off the belt. And a lift truck operator was going by way down at the other end, and he just happened to look up the aisle and he saw that package. He stopped the lift truck, got off, walked up and put that package back on the conveyor belt, because that lift truck operator understood the vision of the organization. He knew what they were striving for. And so you need to communicate your vision among the people that are leading your organization and volunteering and are involved. Everybody understands where you're going. The chances of getting there and getting there quicker are going to be greater. Okay, we're going to skip this because we've done it. The next thing we're going to talk about is values. And this really, this part of the planning process really grew out of working with faith-based organizations along the way, because what we found when we first started doing planning with them was that all of the values and philosophies around their faith began to get in the way of goal setting and so on, because everybody was getting hung up on the language of the faith. And so what we said was, let's do a piece up at the front end that talks about our values as an organization, and those are the things that transcend everything else in terms of our behaviors. And when we get back into the plan example a little bit later, I'll share with you a sample faith-based values statement. Once we've set the vision and done those values, the next thing we're going to do is determine the key goal areas. And one of the questions we will ask, and you'll see it again on the form when we get down to it a little bit later, one of the questions we'll ask is, how will we know when we're capable of achieving our vision? And we'll write some answers to those questions, and you'll see how that plays out a little bit later on here in the process. And then we'll say, based on those statements about how we will know we're capable, they will identify your key goal areas. And there are some key goal areas that are pretty typical for most organizations. Programs, fundraising, communications, staffing an organization, board development. Pretty much see those in every plan we do. And then there are others. If you're thinking about building a building, facilities might be a key goal area. In the case of Kennedy and putting a man on the moon, what were the key goal areas there? Rockets. We had to build rockets capable of getting somebody to the moon. We had to train astronauts. We had to get the public involved because we had to fund that program to a huge amount of money. We had to communicate about it. We had to build facilities, so on and so forth. And all of those things, in fact, I have a presentation that I do that relates nonprofit planning to planning for the space program. It's pretty interesting because everything just kind of follows logically along the way. So once we've set the key goal areas, the next thing we're going to do is set major long-term milestones. Where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years in each one of those key goal areas? In 5 years, we want to be raising $250,000 from individual donors. So that's the 5-year goal. And then we come back and we say, okay, where do we want to be at the end of the current planning year? 1-year goal. Well, if we're raising $50 today and we want to be at $100,000 in 5 years, we're certainly not going to go to $50,000 or whatever in 1 year. And so, you know, we have to keep these first-year goals realistic. And the other thing to remember about planning is when you do a 5-year plan, you're always in the first year of your 5-year plan because every year you're going to update the plan. So your goals 5 years out can be less hard than your goals for the current planning year, because you may exceed some and you're always going to miss some along the way, and you're going to adjust as you go forward. Then we're going to, once we've set the 1-year goals, we're going to look for barriers and opportunities. We want to raise $50,000 this year in our annual appeal campaign. What are the barriers? We don't have anybody that knows anything about annual appeal campaigns. What's the strategy? Call Jim Cummings. He's the expert in annual appeal campaigns. Go to the Institute, listen to the presentation. We'll learn